Alrighty. I like that I'm washed out. You can't see all my wrinkles. So we are continuing on with the brain. I feel like we're in a groove. It's going very smoothly. Nobody has any questions, so that's a great thing. Nah, there's so much I'm not telling you about the brain. It gets very complicated, and we're just kind of doing a cursory overview of the major regions, the major functions, and their locations, and that sort of thing. It's too complicated. There's so much cross communication that it's not linear at all, and that's what you psychology people are for. Figure that out for me, would you? Send me a video, I'll post it. Anyway, this is chapter 14, lecture 3, right? We took a break. We are on to the diencephalon, which I think is actually a pretty big deal, and we'll probably do the cerebral cortex, and we'll see what time it is. I mean, do I do the cerebral cortex as its own lecture? Probably not. I don't spend a lot of time on the brain because, it's too much. So I'm trying to get comfortable here. All right, the diencephalon. Let's get this party started. So the diencephalon has 3 major regions. It has the thalamus, which is this egg-shaped gray matter right smack dab in the middle. I have the hypothalamus, so hypo meaning below it, and connected to the hypothalamus by this little stalk is the pituitary gland, right? So the pituitary gland sits outside the main part of the brain, makes a ton of hormones. We'll be talking about that in the last chapter. And then, here we go, I have the epithalamus. So the epithalamus includes those mammillary bodies we saw for a second. I don't really care. Their reflexes. And the pineal gland. And the pineal gland makes melatonin. And melatonin has to do with sleep versus wakefulness, right? But we'll talk about that. Okay, I think we talk about the thalamus first. Oh, look, it's all color-coded. That's very nice. So again, the thalamus. Below the thalamus is the hypothalamus. Below the hypothalamus was the pituitary gland. And then the pineal gland, the part of the epithalamus. And, well, we'll just start with the thalamus. So the thalamus has the 3rd ventricle smack dab in the middle of it. We already talked about all that. All right. Thalamus. All right. I'm just trying. Oh, look at all of this. Here's the big deal. The thalamus in the center of your brain receives all incoming sensory impulses. Well, except for smell. I didn't know that. And it routes it where it needs to go because all the sensory input will go to different parts of the cerebral cortex. So I call the thalamus like Grand Central Station of your brain. It will get information and it will send it to maybe the parietal lobe. It might send it to the occipital lobe. It might send it to the temporal lobe, depending on what it is. So all incoming sensory information, except for smell, goes to the thalamus, and the thalamus is like, oh, well, that needs to go here, and that needs to go there, and that needs to go somewhere else. All right, I always think that's kind of cool. So as we're zipping up the spinal cord, you will have a separate neuron. Oh, look, hello, Punky Punky. What's up, babes? I'm recording here, I guess that was a commercial break. Get your butt out of my face. Just one of those Sundays. I'm trying to hurry up before Roger gets home because things are going to start. So you will have sensory information coming to the spinal cord. Then you will have one neuron from the spinal cord getting you up to the thalamus, and then there will be a separate one going to a separate region of the brain. In case you were wondering, like, what the deal with that is. Okay, so relays and processes sensory input except for smell. And then it also has input from the cerebellum to the frontal cortex. That's the motor area. So again, more relay because I have a lot of communication between the cerebellum and the frontal cortex to manage voluntary skeletal contraction, voluntary movement, motor, different parts of the cortex. And this is crazy because the thalamus does all this other stuff and I'm not comfortable with talking about. I don't understand, but the thalamus, I just go as this big relay station, but it functions in maintenance of consciousness, pain perception, memory, learning, cognition, understanding, and emotions. So that's a lot more. So the thalamus is part of this whole limbic system, which again, I don't feel comfortable talking about. I do, however, like the hypothalamus. I call the hypothalamus the boss. He is the boss of the body for the most part because your hypothalamus, so this is the thalamus up here. Just below it is the hypothalamus, and then connected to the hypothalamus via a special stalk called the infundibulum is the pineal gland. I mean the pituitary gland. Oh, not the pineal. Pineal gland is up in this area here, and this is the pineal gland. All right. So the hypothalamus is this region right here, and there's all different types of nuclei, so all different types of cell bodies. One of the major regulators of homeostasis. So let's talk about this. So this has a very thin to non-existent blood-brain barrier. We'll just go blood-brain barrier. Okay, that's important because it's got to know what's going on with the body at all times. This determines whether you are freaking out in sympathetic nervous system mode or if you're chilling and you're in parasympathetic nervous system mode. The hypothalamus will get all this input and go, yep, you should be freaking out. Let's turn that switch on and start having those responses. So, he is the one that determines based on input, and then he'll tap into like the medulla oblongata to increase your heart rate. Tap into the medulla, go, hey, you need to increase respiratory rate, increase heart rate, all these outputs because he's the boss, right? Doesn't really get his hands dirty, but he's the one telling everybody else what to do. The hypothalamus produces a whole slew of hormones, for the most part, that control the pituitary gland, releasing factors and inhibiting factors. We're going to go into great detail on that in the endocrine, chapter. And the hypothalamus actually makes his own two hormones that regulate water content. Antidiuretic hormone, and another one, oxytocin, is a positive feedback hormone for labor and delivery. The hypothalamus works with the limbic system for emotional and behavioral responses, regulates eating, your feelings of being full, feelings of, fullness, S-A-T, satiety, I don't know how to say that word. Your feeling of being full is because of the hypothalamus, and your thirst mechanism, your feeling of being thirsty, originates with the hypothalamus. So eating, drinking, hormones, whether you're freaking out, whether you're not, controls your body temperature. Is there another slide? Oh, it is. Okay. I thought there might be more. Okay. Controls your body temperature. Monitoring, so hence the thin blood-brain barrier, to check your osmotic pressure. That has to do with your water content. How salty is your blood? Temperature, this and that. So it's going to get a lot of input from the eye and other areas, send output to the pineal gland to regulate your state of consciousness. So if you are blind and you don't have this input from the eye, your 24-hour period gets off a little bit, right? So there's medications for that. I don't know specifics. I'm going to just leave it at that. So the main input is from the eyes. And then it will work with the pineal gland. The pineal gland makes melatonin, and melatonin levels are high at night and low in the day. I would say low at day. I know nobody talks like that. And then also speaking to that reticular formation for the state of consciousness. Okay. So that is why I call the hypothalamus the boss. I mean, it manages most functions in our body, like just a ton, really, because it's managing the pituitary gland and other aspects. And then there's the mammillary bodies. We'll see those when we do a brain dissection, and their reflexes for smell. Okay. All right, so here's the epithalamus. So let's see. We just already talked about the majority of it. So I have the thalamus, I have the hypothalamus on the one side, and then I have the epithalamus on the other side. And the majority, so the pineal gland is the majority of the epithalamus, and that secretes melatonin. I don't really want to talk about this habenular nuclei. I don't even think I spelled that right. Okay. Oh, well, I have a little bit more about the pineal gland. Main is secreting melatonin, right? Some people take melatonin to help them promote sleepiness. I have a story, but I'm not going to talk about it. And it helps with setting our biological circadian rhythm, our biological clock, our 24-hour cycle. 24-hour cycle of wake and sleepiness. Which is about to change because we're going to be switching the clocks. Oh, well, by the time you look at this, the clocks will be switched. So there's this other part. Oh, I do have a slide on this. Okay, I don't think I usually talk about this. And these are called the circumventricular organs of the diencephalon. So it's part of the diencephalon. Is there a picture? Nope. And I don't really know much about the circumventricular organism. That's Roger. I'll be honest, I don't know much about the circumventricular organs. They're associated with the diencephalon, and there's no blood-brain barrier. So here, so it has to do with part of the hypothalamus, where it's very thin, the pineal and the pituitary gland. And that is all I say. So parts of it can monitor chemical changes because they lack a blood-brain barrier. So this is the part of the hypothalamus. So there's overlap, right? It's not a separate entity. This is where the monitoring is happening to then initiate a response, or the hypothalamus. So tapping into, when we're tapping into homeostasis and overall body condition, where's my pen? Oh, how we change it is via a nervous system initiated response, which would be really quick, or a hormone initiated response, which will take a little bit longer time. But this is my how about I spell response right? These are my two ways of maintaining homeostasis. Either have a response that's quick via the nervous system, or have a response that's slower via hormones. Okay, what time is it? Okay, it's only 15 minutes. So that was talking. So here's just part of your table, talking about the thalamus. Where is it? Oops, what does it do? I'm trying to find my pen. The thalamus, right in the middle. Hypothalamus on the side. All right, you see, look at everything the hypothalamus does. And the epithalamus on the other side of the thalamus. Okay, now we have the cerebrum. So the cerebrum is a ton of gray matter, which means it's all cell bodies, right? That was what gray matter was. And there's ups and downs. The gyrus is the up part, and the sulcus is the down part. So it's all these ups and downs of my gray matter. Nope, come on, you. So this is all gray matter. Oh, you deleted it all. And when I have all this ups and downs, gyrus and the sulcus, it increases surface area. So I have more brain power as opposed to just a smooth surface, right? So I have white matter bringing signals to the gray matter. So down below, deep to the outer layer. So the outer layer is the cerebral cortex. Deep to it is white matter because that's my highways, my tracks of neurons. That's my highways of axons, bringing information there. So what's important to note is if when you have your bone and then you have all your meninges, your gray matter, your cell bodies, your cerebral cortex is the outermost layer. So kind of putting it out there. It's not really protecting it when it's the outermost layer. Now, I have all this white matter, and then I have a bundle of white matter that connects the right and the left side, and that's called the corpus callosum. Right? So the corpus callosum is a bundle of axons connecting the right side and the left side of the brain. Okay, so this is what I just drew on the other slide, and I struggled with it, right? So I have the gyrus is the up part, the sulcus is the down part, and I've got my gray matter lining all of this cerebral cortex. So the cerebral cortex is the outermost layer. And then I have these deep grooves, and they're called fissures. So a super deep sulcus. So I have a longitudinal fissure separating the two halves, right? And then I have other types of fissures that are not shown on this, but let me pause. Hey guys, I'm back. That was Roger. You don't know, but I've taken a bit of a break from when I hit pause to now that I'm back. All right, so we were talking about some anatomy of the cerebral cortex. Oops, let me get on the right thing. And the sun has come out now. It's super bright behind me. Can't even see myself. All right, so we left off with the corpus callosum, and then we had the gyri and the sulci. So gyrus and the sulcus. So when we see these elevated parts of the brain, right? It's like spaghetti all convoluted. That's a gyrus. And then that shallow groove is a sulcus. So then we have the deep grooves. Those are fissures. So I have a longitudinal fissure that separates the halves, which again are connected by the corpus callosum. We'll see that on another diagram. But then I have another fissure here. I'm just going to talk about fissures for a second. Let me find where my pen is. And this fissure separates cerebrum from cerebellum, and that's the transverse fissure. So that's another big separation in the brain. And then I have kind of a really special groove in the brain, and that's called the central sulcus. All right. And the central sulcus separates the frontal lobe, right? Because orient yourself, put the bun in the back. The bun is the cerebellum, right? So put the bun in the back. Frontal lobe, and the central sulcus separates it from the parietal lobe here. So you have the precentral gyrus, so it's the raised up area before the central sulcus, and then the postcentral gyrus. And we're going to see that in some of our vocabulary. I don't really talk about it in those terms. Okay, so this was the central sulcus, separating the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe. We then, at the very back, have the occipital lobe. Oh, so I guess I've hopped to lobes of the cortex. So I have the frontal lobe right here. I have the parietal lobe, this region here. I have the occipital lobe. And then kind of over the ears, I have the temporal lobe. Now deep below the temporal lobe is this fifth lobe I don't like talking about, and that's called the insula. So I don't really talk too much about it because I get it confused. These are just different tracks associated with the brain, but what I want to point out is, so this is all cerebral cortex, like it says, and these are all axon tracks, which actually are pretty cool. But this band here, this band is that band of white matter, myelinated axons, that connect the two halves, and that's called the corpus callosum. And then we had ventricles here, if you remember that little gap was a ventricle filled with cerebrospinal fluid. And the thalamus is right smack dab in the middle. This is the thalamus, this is hypothalamus, this is pineal gland, sort of thing. So just to orient you. So this is the corpus callosum. Okay, lobes are named for the bones that are above them. So like we said, we had the frontal, the frontal lobe, the parietal, the temporal, the occipital, and then we had the insula. Oh, and we talked about all of these fissures. There's the longitudinal fissure, and there's, the transverse fissure, but the transverse fissure isn't part of the cerebrum. The central sulcus separating the frontal and parietal lobes. There's a lateral sulcus between frontal and temporal, and then this other sulcus I'll never talk about. All right, so here we have our frontal lobe, our parietal lobe, our occipital lobe, our temporal lobe, and then deep to it is the insula. We have the central sulcus. We have that parieto-occipital sulcus. We have the lateral sulcus. Why aren't those all on here? I don't know. You think they would be. I'm like, let's just label it all. Why not? Okay, what else do we have? And, all this gray matter deep to it, I'm never going to talk about, of this caudate nuclei, the putamen and the globus pallidus. I don't know what that does. Oh, here's the functions. Oh, the basal nuclei, that's what all of this together is. Has to do with voluntary movements and muscle tone and, like walking, those learned skeletal muscle activities, and then some cognition. Okay, I'm just giving this information to you. The basal nuclei, though, the basal nuclei are all of this gray matter cell bodies deep to the cerebral cortex. So I'd cerebral cortex on the outer area. Cerebrum. I have the corpus callosum joining the two halves together. I've got those holes of those lateral ventricles. And then I have the basal nuclei that has to do with all of that other functions. I guess I'm not going to say too much else about it. Oh, here's a bigger picture. Very nice. The limbic system grabs all these different regions of the brain. We'll just leave it at that. It's your emotional brain, it's your memory, and it taps into every other area of the brain. It's not like, smack dab one little spot. I don't really understand memory, so I'm not going to talk about it. Okay. Oh, well, here's more on the limbic system and its locations. Range of emotions, right? So emotional brain, pain, pleasure, rage, anger, affection, docility, docile. So this is kind of cool. So part of the limbic system is the amygdala. You guys always seem to like that area and you know all about it. And if somebody has a damaged amygdala, they're unable to recognize fear in others, and therefore they are unable to like express fear in a situation where they should be afraid. I don't know. I think that's kind of cool. So now let's talk about the different parts of the brain and what they do. Oh, Nelly, look at all of this. So what you don't see is the cerebellum would be right here. All right, so here is the frontal lobe. Is this, well, it's actually all of this. All right. Oh, and it even says it is. Okay, so that's the frontal lobe. What do we have in the frontal lobe? We have voluntary skeletal contraction movements. So voluntary movement, motor. And that's the primary motor. You have, when you move your eyes, because it's voluntary, that is also in the frontal lobe. You have the speech. Speech is usually on the left side of your frontal lobe. There is lateralization, where some functions are only on one side of your brain and not on both. And then you have this region here, which is the prefrontal cortex, and that's what's still developing into your 20s. All right, so this is all having to do with motor response, except prefrontal has to do with judgment and those sorts of learned behaviors. No comment. I have the temporal lobe, and that's my primary auditory, right, across from your ears. I have the parietal lobe, and the parietal lobe is on the other side of that groove, that central sulcus, and this is somatosensory. So this is where the general senses input goes to be evaluated. I forget what Wernicke's does. Oh, it has to do with language, doesn't it? What did I write anything about Wernicke's? Broken. Nope, of course I didn't. The occipital lobe is back here. And this is all having to do with your vision. Remember I told you my mother-in-law had her subdural hematoma, and it was over her occipital cortex. She had major issues with her visual association, which was very interesting to witness. Okay, so deep to the temporal lobe is where I have taste. Oh, see, and then smell. Smell is kind of, where is smell? Smell is right here. So a smell on the insula, a smell on the temporal lobe. I think it's on the temporal lobe. We'll see. Okay. Let's go right here. Oh, all right. Well, let's keep moving along. Okay. Sensory motor association areas. Sounds good. Primary somatosensory area. So this is my parietal lobe. Parietal lobe gets information on all those general senses that we talked about because of that one lab, and the whole body is mapped on it. Allowing you to know exactly where that sensation is occurring. Visual is on your occipital lobe. Auditory is on your temporal lobe. Smell is also on your temporal lobe, and taste is on, I don't know, taste was on the insula, so this is not correct. Taste is not parietal. Okay. Motor. Okay, so motor, this is the frontal lobe. Do I have prefrontal cortex? No, I didn't. All right, we'll talk about that in a minute. So this is what's controlling your voluntary contractions, but remember, it's working with the cerebellum to make them right. And it's a map of the whole body, just like with the somatosensory has a map of your body, so does the motor. And you're going to use more brain space if you have more complicated movements. So Broca's area is also on the frontal lobe, and that has to do with speech, controlling muscles for production and for airflow. That's kind of cool. Oh, I'm not going to really go into this because it's still the same lobes working. Oh, here we go. Here's what Wernicke's is. Remember I said, I don't know what Wernicke's is. It's interpreting the meaning of speech, translating words into thought. That's complicated. The prefrontal cortex, I don't have a slide on. Where did I put it? Prefrontal. I want to see if it pops up here. Oh, here we go. Prefrontal cortex, well developed in primates, so it's concerned with personality, intellect, complex learning, judgment, reasoning, conscious intuition, abstract idea development, planning, right? So your intrinsic motivation. And this is what develops while you're, while through like your 20s. Right? So it's very much affected by illegal substances. Oh, I had something else to talk about. That's right. Premotor. Okay. Well, this is all in the frontal cortex of this frontal eye field and all of that. Yeah, see, that's all in the frontal lobe. I have to talk about this, but I wanted to talk about one other thing. What I forgot to talk about is, that's funny, rats, association areas. We'll talk about it this way. Remember how we had movement and it was the frontal lobe and it communicates with the cerebellum, and the cerebellum will assess what's going on and will, talk back to the frontal lobe to make skeletal muscle contractions spot on. Well, when you drink, alcohol goes across the blood-brain barrier and takes the cerebellum out of the picture. So alcohol, because it takes the cerebellum out of the picture, is why you get all sloppy, right? You fall, you don't have any balance, you have crappy judgment on moving your body. I thought that was kind of cool, and I forgot to talk about that. So sorry for that. All right, so we have this hemispheric lateralization, and what this means is that there are differences between the two halves, right? You're more left brain, you're more right brain, and we say left brain's more analytical, reasoning, scientific skills. Right brain's more artistic, musical, those sorts of talents and skills. What else does it say about the right brain? Spatial, pattern perception, facial recognition, mental images of sight, sound, smell. Oh, look, patients who have damage in the right hemisphere talk with a monotone with no emotional inflection. So we know don't have any issues with the right hemisphere. But the left side is typically where the Broca speech is. Now, I do have an interesting story. Let me see. Is that all I really wanted to talk about? Oh, and here's just a nice table about the lateralization of what's typically on the left side versus what's typically on the right side. So here's the deal. Let me go to full screen. When my Aunt Jeannie had her stroke, her lack of blood supply because of blood clot, it went to her frontal lobe on her left side, because your left side manages your right side of movement, right? Because it crosses over. I didn't talk about that. Maybe you knew that, maybe you didn't, whatever. So she had this huge lack of oxygen to a major portion of her frontal lobe on her left side. And they're like, she's never going to talk again. She's never going to walk again. There's not much. But she was coming back. She got on her blood thinners, busted up the clot. They saw that it was some tissue on a heart valve flap that caused platelets to become sticky. They formed a clot, clogged a vessel going up to her brain, lack of oxygen for a long, significant time, poor choices in where to send her, whatever. Like, you know. And another thing that's interesting with stroke therapy is when I went and visited her and she was still in a coma, she did come out of it. It's freezing, right? They do this cold therapy, and this cold therapy reduces swelling. So the rooms are really cold, reduces swelling and slows down the damage and everything. So here's my Aunt Jeannie, and all of a sudden, she's recovering. She's learning how to walk. She's walking. She's trying to talk. She's recognizing. And they're like, we weren't expecting to see that. What's happening? She's a righty, right? And they're like, she is right-handed, but you know what? She started out as a lefty. So because she started out as a lefty, she actually had more dominant motor skills on her right side of her brain. So when her left side crapped out, her right side's like, okay, I'll take care of it. Because that's where all those functions had started. And she was forced to become a righty. So because she had all that already developed in her right side, everything was coming back for her. Oh, Roger's back in the house. So unfortunately, they were going to do a biopsy because she had lung cancer, and they had to take her off her blood thinners, which caused another stroke, and we lost her. But she was kind of pretty cool medical miracle in that she was coming back to us for a few weeks. Jenny, it's Dad. You're okay. Sorry about that, guys. We're almost done, though. That's why I'm not pausing this. Okay, so where am I? All right. That is the brain. There are these slides on brain waves and all these slides on nerves. I'm not going to talk about that. If you can read about them. I don't put that stuff on your exam, but I just wanted to talk about this last slide, and then we're done. And this is about aging. So what's happening to my brain and my nervous system when I'm aging? 1, my neurons are dying. 2, I'm not going to be able to, where am I? My nerve impulses going back and from the brain are slowing down, right? Diminished capacity. I'm not able to, whatever, you know what I'm trying to say, slowing. I am not going to be processing things as quickly. My reflexes are slower. Oh, right here, increased reflex time. Slowing of voluntary movements, right? My senses are going to start crapping out. It's just how your body's not meant to live forever. And there were all these disorders in your book, and we've talked a little bit about them, about strokes. We have the ischemic stroke, which is a blood clot, the hemorrhagic stroke, which is an aneurysm, cold water treatment, but even just cold treatment, I definitely witnessed on my own. You have a TIA, a transient ischemic attack, meaning you have some blockage of blood flow to the brain for a different reason, and it's not long lasting, it's quick. You have Alzheimer's, which I think 1 or 2 people wrote their paper on. And then this is that chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Oh my God, encephalopathy. This has to do with like the boxer, sports head injury, repeated, boxer sports head injuries. That they are looking, like Alzheimer's because their brain has just had too much trauma, and cumulatively it is affecting it, it's damaging it. So that is all I have. Now, what I haven't told anybody yet, is that your exam 5, which is on nervous tissue and the brain, is kind of my take-home test of the semester. So you have a period of days to complete it, but it's untimed. So spend some time with this information. When it comes to the brain, it's just the parts, the anatomy, the location, and an overarching function, right? We went into depth on the meninges. We went into depth on the flow of cerebrospinal fluid. Don't forget about that stuff. That was in lecture 1. But otherwise, don't get too hung up with the brain. Just kind of know generally there's a whole lot going on. I didn't talk about the basal nuclei. They're so complicated. It hurts my head, and I don't know it, I'll be honest. Anyway, that brings chapter 12 to an end, and I'm very excited about that because I've got 2 chapters left. We can do this. We are doing this, right? There's no what we can. We are. Good luck, you guys. We are making it happen, and I'm really proud of all your efforts, even though I'm unable to see you. And I'm only seeing myself with all these rays of sun. Anyway, take care, and I'll catch you later. Bye.